Art can complicate our understandings and perception of the world. The art of animation or cartoons is a significant way of engaging a huge audience with the use of satire while implementing intentional messages to persuade society. Companies such as Disney are well known for their part of many childhoods with their inspiring characters and film plots, but many people are unaware how even the innocence of Disney is able to cultivate what they want us to see and what they want us to know. The approach of Wartime dramatically changed the intentions with cartoons. Animated cartoons were able to modify representations of wartime themes, and how their use of propaganda and patriotism was further problematized by the issue of mass consumption and artistic intent. Cartoons were an ideal vehicle for delivering political and nationalist messages. The wartime influenced the innocent art of animation to use intentional bias, misleading political information, and favorable patriotism to purposely obtain a specific response. Thus, the approach of World War II, cartoons reflected a new humanity that they had not had previously alluded to in characters before. The new breed of anti-heroes arose during World War II when their various misadventures in the war effort symbolized the collective impulse towards active participation in the war. Patriotic themes and propaganda in the wartime comics strongly expressed the need for cooperation and unity. Animated cartoons had a role by emphasizing the necessity of an individual involvement in the larger cause of the military war effort. The significant transition. Most of the major Hollywood cartoon studios established themselves around the early 1920s and truly became prominent during the mid to late 1930s. Disney's groundbreaking 1928 Steamboat Willie was the first sound cartoon produced and really drove the strong competition among studios to produce better cartoons and develop their own styles. As we approached the prelude to war, cartoons had a new aggressiveness about them which they had not had in traditional Disney school. Chuck Jones, for example, who is a famous American animator, went from designing Sniffles the Mouse to Daffy Duck in the early years of his career and continued to experiment with characters that had more complex, diabolical components to their personalities, more notably Willie E. Coyote. Likewise, Disney created Donald Duck, a character whose greed, guile, and short temper gave him a wider range of expressions than any previous Disney star had. Still, prior to America's involvement in the war, companies like Disney continued to release cartoons which reflected the studio's trademark style, cute with photorealistic details and family-oriented storylines. In the years just preceding the Second World War, Disney started to move into feature-length animation, a market which continues to dominate today. In 1937, the studio released its first feature-length cartoon, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and the film received unprecedented acclaim from critics and audiences. Following the commercial success of Snow White, Disney could afford to begin production on two large-scale projects simultaneously. The first was Pinocchio, a film that retained the same success as Snow White and reinforced Disney's dominance of feature-length cartoon production. The second release was Fantasia, which wasn't as successful. Now, just prior to 1941, when the US officially engaged in the war, initial cartoons addressing the war overseas carried pacifistic messages. Disney released 1938 Ferdinand the Bull and MGM's 1939 cartoon Peace on Earth are animated fables that illustrate the irrationality of war. In Ferdinand, a bull prefers flowers over fighting matadors, and in Peace, will and animals frolic in a post-apocalyptic world reflect on human self-destruction. Notably, both anti-war cartoons were released before American involvement in the war, and as soon as the US declaration of war, it impacted heavily on the predominant themes of popular media and spawned a new emphasis on the victory and struggle between good and evil. Heroism was the new ideal, and the representation of a strong, united America in the popular media became the agenda at the Hollywood studios. Disney's popular features continue to consist of light-hearted and family-oriented fare, but contrasted sharply with the majority emphasizing the America's military importance. This significant transition is apparent when comparing a famous wartime short, The Fuhrer Face, which features Donald Duck as a factory worker living in Nazi Germany.
Wenn der Führer says, wie ist der Master Race? The higher, right in the Führer's face. Not
Donald is shown living in poverty because of the Nazi regime. Famous scene has Donald hoarding a single coffee bean on a string and generally unhappy with the circumstances. Though the cartoon also mentions the blind faith in the Führer, it is further mocked in the award-winning soundtrack that accompanies the cartoon.
When the Führer says, here's the master race, be higher, right in
in the Führer's face, not to love the Führer. He's a gay, so we Heil! Heil! Right in the Führer's face.
The cartoon itself and the song represents the German population as a misguided mass of citizens who contribute to the power of the Nazi system and are victims of it. The Führer face is a cartoon that is uncharacteristic of Disney's earlier styles. It is evident at the approach of the war, Donald was one of the first Disney characters to experiment with a deviant personality and with more complicated set of traits. He's a more flexible character than Mickey Mouse or Goofy, consequently he could be a Nazi, whereas the earlier more saccharine Mickey Mouse cannot. This shows how the approach of the war transitioned the art style of cartoon studios such as Disney to create characters that are able to evolve as a Nazi, such as Donald Duck. And with these new additions to new styles and characters, they were able to influence the detrimental impact of a Nazi government with the misadventures of a character like Donald Duck to promote the importance of American military involvement for the greater cause of the world. Propaganda, scaring society to get involved with the war. As we just dived in, it is evident that the approach of World War dramatically influenced the style of cartoons. In this new addition to new styling and plots, it truly emphasizes the population's importance in the military war effort as we witness with the misadventures of cartoons. Another significant adaptation that the cartoons obtained by the influence of wartime is the use of propaganda, which was meant to scare the society into knowing who was the enemy and the consequences of losing the war. Tokyo Jokyo is a significant short animation that was rife with propaganda messages. Looney Tunes' 1943 cartoon was a satirical news clip titled Nippon News of the Week and took a different angle than that of Commando Duck. Donald's cartoon depicts the Japanese as sneaky and dishonorable.
All right, here he coming. Time to shooting now, please, I hope. No, wait, please. Japanese customs say always shooting a man in the back, please. Oh, thank you.
Tokyo Jokyo, on the other hand, characterizes the enemy as inept and incapable. The first cartoon was released in 1942, soon after the attack on Pearl Harbor, when the memory of the Japanese attack was still fresh in American minds and truly gross propaganda began. Tokyo Jokyo is intended to represent the American military confidence. In the short, the Japanese are portrayed in the usual racial and stereotyped way. They have glasses, big teeth, and are altogether caricatured. The cartoon trivializes different aspects of the Japanese war machine. It shows their most advanced air raid siren, their airplane spotters,
Over here, our honorable aircraft spotter.
and their fire prevention headquarters, which have clearly failed as the camera pans to a set of charred buildings. The animation grows more explicit as it progresses, showing a scene where a Japanese man is blown up after trying to roast a hot dog over an incendiary bomb. Most importantly, the cartoon satirizes other angles of the Japanese military beside their tragic ineptitude. The second part of the cartoon, headlined Poisonalities, introduces the audience to Admiral Yamamoto, the military leader of the Japanese. He appears opposing at first as he is at his desk, then is revealed that he is standing on stilts, thus depicting him as a slight stature and therefore less powerful, as smallness is associated with weakness.
For Japanese Navy or
The final segment of the cartoon shows the audience the Japanese Navy all at sea, a half-constructed submarine swimming through the ocean as a
very technical.
sailors play inside on slot machines. Further along, the scene changes to a minesweeper, a boat with a broom, and the busiest aircraft carrier, which is covered with the ruin of downed Japanese planes. The cartoon clearly depicts Japanese leaders as weak and ineffective, and Japanese naval resources as inferior and not to be feared. The cartoon's lasting message is that the Japanese military is inept, ineffectual, and unprepared. Whereas the enemy might have been feared in the vulnerable months after the American defeat at Pearl Harbor, they were now a laughingstock and should not be a source of intimidation. In Commando Duck, the very concluding scene is seen with Donald Duck writing on paper, "Washed out the same," clearly promoting Americans to wash out Japan as they did in Pearl Harbor. We can conclude from this that after the devastating event of Pearl Harbor, the use of gross propaganda escalated in cartoons with its intent to further emphasize the necessity of individual involvement in the larger cause of the military war effort. Looking more towards Nazi propaganda, the Education for Death was made in 1942, just a couple months prior to their declaration of war as well. The final segment is perhaps the most important part of the film. Its significant propaganda makes it visible the main reason to hate and fear Nazis. The cartoon shows Nazi soldiers marching through a red and fiery background, almost looking like devils as they carry torches to burn books. The Holy Bible is replaced with Mein Kampf. The crucifix changes into a Nazi sword with a swastika in the middle, and the stained glass windows of a church shatters as fire comes through. This is powerful imagery and is clearly meant to strike fear in the audience. While earlier caricatures portrayed the Nazis as aggressive men that cannot control their rage, this segment shows that they're also godless demons. In a similar fashion to Franklin D. Roosevelt's fireside chats that warned the American population what would happen if the Nazis were to gain power in the Western Hemisphere.
The Western Hemisphere will be within range of the Nazi weapons of destruction.
This cartoon shows what would happen to something as foundational as a religion under Nazi rule. The animation ends with Han hailing and marching with no seed of laughter, hope, tolerance, or mercy, as he and his fellow soldiers continue trampling on the rights of others. The message of the cartoon is both explicit in the sense that the narrator tells the audience about Nazi ideology. They trample the weak, conquer weaker neighboring nations, burn religious items, and utterly lack laughter, hope, tolerance, or mercy, thus reminding the audience what they would lose under Nazi control and the importance of Americans to fight to prevent from the portrayed catastrophic Nazi takeover. Patriotism, relief to be a proud American.
Hey, Americans, don't give up.
On top of propaganda, the use of patriotism was a prominent implementation in development from the influence of the World War time period. By its nature, patriotism induces people to follow a certain policy, campaign, even if they have a conflict of interest. Patriotism enables building social consensus among the public, thus promoting society's engagement in the war. The Fear of Face and The Education for Death are two very similar propaganda-intended films. They both depict the average German as a cog in the Nazi machine, but also indirectly advertise the importance of the American government. Simultaneously, the scenario distinguishes the German citizenry from the greater evil of Nazism, which is not attributed to the people but instead represented as an abstract, corrupting force at work within the country and its government, and represents them in a dehumanizing way. They are merely robots who absorb orders from the Nazi government and accordingly behave in unacceptable ways. The implicit suggestion this representation makes in the cartoons is that Americans would never behave in this manner because, unlike the generic Germans, they possess the power of self-determination and a trustworthy government. These particular cartoons do not invest much time in the direct representation of American life, but the apparent absence of an American in-group illustrates American identity in the relief against an enemy country. When Donald awakens from his Nazi nightmare in Face, he finds himself safely returned to the comfort of his family American life. After waking from his dream, the relief he feels is a relief that Disney producers expect the audience to share at the end of the film. The film's demonization of the Nazi regime is designed to stimulate a renewed appreciation of democracy in Americans and remind the nation of what it stands to lose by not contributing to the war effort. Contrary to Disney's cartoons, the animated shorts produced at Warner Brothers Studio also used the proud American soldier to promote war involvement. Cartoons such as Drafty Daffy and Draft Horse directly represent the conscription of characters into the military. Cartoon idols such as Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck were drafted into the war effort and shared the screens with caricature versions of the real enemies of World War II. The popular Warner Brothers cartoon also further emphasized the importance of war involvement with including a glimpse of idealized American heroism. The patriotic theme is particularly evident in two of Daffy Duck cartoons, Daffy the Commando and Scrappy Happy Daffy. Daffy the Commando has Daffy, the lone American soldier, acting as one-man army as he infiltrates the German headquarters, harasses the vultures running the place, then sails through the air after being shot out of a Nazi cannon with an American flag in each end as patriotic music plays in the background. Scrappy Happy Daffy features an even longer scene celebrating American identity and achievements with the song Americans Don't Give Up. Daffy collapses in despair after trying to fight off a metal-eating Nazi goat that the German forces sent to destroy the American scrap iron reserves. Patriotic ghosts appear before him, all of them Daffy isotopes, wearing historical outfits and chanting
Americans don't give up.
until Daffy, encouraged by their support, becomes a super American who shoots up into the sky wearing a Superman-like costume. Coincidentally, the Bugs Bunny cartoon Super Rabbit features Bugs as a comic superhero, but concludes with him transforming into a real Superman, a US Marine.
This looks like a job for a real Superman. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli.
The superlative courage of fantasy heroes is outshone by the everyday heroics of the real Supermen of the front lines. Popular media elevated the duty of the common soldier to superhero status, such that good soldiering transcended all former definitions of action hero exploits and came to represent a new hero ideal.
Ahead. Heroes, everyone. Heroes by the million.
The nation wanted for a new hero mythology that incorporated their participation in the good war, and it sated its need through the image of the great American warrior. Overall, through the cartoons, we can conclude that the new breed of anti-heroes arose during World War II, when their various misadventures in the war effort symbolized the collective impulse towards active participation in the war. We observed a significant transition with the style and plot of the cartoons, and their influence to use purposeful patriotic themes and gross propaganda in the wartime comics to emphasize the necessity of individual involvement in the larger cause of the military war effort.